continue to break down SEC teams from roster retention, what they lost in the portal, what they gained in the portal, and their high school signing classes. So we'll jump right into Missouri here, Kevin.
So, Missouri, when you look at 2025 versus 2026, um, first thing I want to do is, again, we talked a little bit about coaches. I think the offensive coordinator, Kirby Moore got a head job Washington State, and then Chip Lindsey, who has coached at a lot of places, is the new OC at Missouri. I think again that's the biggest change for Missouri when you go year over year. Kirby Moore had a lot of success with offense at Missouri, and that's been their best years for Drinkowitz. So, can can the offense continue to be really good under Chip Lindsey? And I'll be honest, I think more. I think Lindsey's a drop off. I'll just say that first. And then let's get into things. So, first of all, I think the quarterback room actually will be better next year. They get Austin Simmons from Ole Miss. Matt Zellers will be a sophomore next year. And then the question of does Sam Horn come back and give him another year? He was hurt in the first game. And so you don't know about Horn, but I like Simmons better than Prabula. Prabula was a good athlete, but wasn't a really good passer, and that really hurt their offense this year, I think. I think Austin Simmons, much more talent on the passing side. And I know Missouri coaches are high on Zollers. So I think the quarterback room is better. You go from there to the running back room, you have Ahmad Hardy and Jamal Roberts back. So that's solid. They did lose Marquise Davis and Tavion Jones in the portal, but their running back room, they're too deep there. They're good. I think they're improved on their offensive line. They do bring Caden Green back and some others, but they also picked up Josh Atkins from Arizona State at left tackle, and I think that's a big pickup. He was pretty good. And then they also get Luke Work from Mississippi State. So to me, they got more depth on the offensive line. I think their offensive line is an improvement. So, when you look at their offense so far, better quarterback room, solid running back room, better offensive line, then that takes us to receivers. So they do have Kevin Coleman back, but they lost Marquise Johnson and Josh Manning in the portal. And those were two solid receivers. They do also bring in Caden Lee, who I think is probably better than Manning or Johnson, if you just want my opinion on him. They bring in Deshaun Montgomery, and then Devin Alagbuden was a freshman that came on at the end of the year. So again, when I look at their wide receiver room, even though they lost Johnson and Manning, and those are two good players, I think with the addition of Lee this weekend, they're every bit as strong in the wide receiver room as they were, and maybe more depth there too. So I would say offensively, Missouri was probably a good solid B last year. I think they move up to a B plus, maybe A minus potential, just on talent, on what they have, and a lot will depend on that offensive line whether that moves to a solid A or not. Go to the defensive side of the ball. They were really good at edge last year. Um, they had Damon Wilson, who ended up at Miami, Zion Young, Nate Johnson. Young graduated. So they did lose some players there. They pick up Malik Bryant, Dante Simpkins, and so they do have some players and Zion Smith. So they got some players at defensive end, but I think that's their biggest difference between last year's and this year's team. Last year's team could really get after the quarterback. This year's team will have to prove that they can. Um, Tackle wise, they graduated a couple players. Chris McClellan to me was a really good player, and so they'll have some depth to build there. Where I think they get really a lot better defensively is in the linebacker room. They bring Robert Woodard from Auburn. You mentioned him last night, DMAC, and then they have Nick Rodriguez and back. And so I think with the addition of Woodyard, they strengthen that linebacker room just a little bit. Secondary wise, they lose Marvin Burks, who was a big hitter in the secondary. wasn't the best with coverage. They add Chris Graves, Jaleel Florence, Elijah Dotson. Those are in Kinsley Porter. Some guys that they add in the secondary. So I think, overall defensively, they might take a little bit of a step back. Now, that being said, the last few years they've lost players and done well in the portal and brought people in. So I don't think it'll be a major step back. I just think that defensive end room will have to develop some. I think tackle they'll stay about the same, a little better at linebacker, and maybe even a little better total in the secondary with the additions that they've got there. So, but I think Missouri, can expect another competitive team. Again, my thoughts are Chip Lindsey has to come through as the offensive coordinator. What's y'all's thoughts on Missouri?
Yeah, I think Chip Lindsey was at Southern Miss with Todd Monken, so I think he's going to need to harness a little Todd Monken in his scheme this year for them to be successful. But my player, my favorite player that they picked up out of the portal is Robert Woodyard. They lose Josiah Trotter, Khalil Jacobs, and Tristan Newsom, but I think Woodyard more than replaces any of those guys. So I think he was one of the better defensive pickups for an SEC team. He played in the SEC last year at Auburn, but my favorite pickup outside of some guys LSU got is Woodyard for sure for a team in the SEC. What are your thoughts, Sweets?
Yeah, they picked up a trio of defenders from Miami as well. They picked up linebacker Bobby Washington. Who are the other two guys that they had picked up? I was just reading the article. They picked up an edge player and a DL as well. So Drinkwitz was busy in the portal trying to shore up that defense. Not a lot of numbers brought in from the Miami trio, but a lot of potential and talent. So like it is with a lot of these portal guys, people are betting on the come instead of what's already been proven. So we'll see how they work out for Mizzou and Drinkwitz. Where are we going next, D-Mac?
Yeah, you want to go into Vanderbilt here?
Sure. Yeah. So Vanderbilt stepping up this year. Clark Lee has picked up 18 guys in the portal with an average of an 86.53 rating. So a solid 3-star rating for the kids that they've brought in there. They lost 20 kids to the portal, but they didn't lose a ton of production. Some of the better players they've got, Brian Allen out of Iowa, defensive end. Sorry, Javante Carter, tight end from East Carolina, and Micah DeBose, an interior lineman from Alabama. All those guys should step in and play immediately for Vanderbilt, and see what they could do there. They lost Trey Richardson, who was a wide receiver. Linus Zunk and Tredell Berry were their three highest rated guys that they lost. Like I said, not a lot of production, but there was some talent there. Vanderbilt, we'll see how they end up at quarterback. Pavia is not going to play his 12th year next season, so he's going to try to go to the NFL, or I sent him a DM to join my car club that I'm starting. I think he'll fit in well with us. So I wish Vanderbilt well. Like I said, I really wanted to see them in the playoff this year, so I was kind of disappointed with how that all turned out. But what are your thoughts on Vanderbilt, DMAC?
Yeah, they graduated, I think, 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen. They brought in a couple transfers in Lyndon Cooper and Bo Johnson to play center and tackle. And then they brought in Micah DeBose, too, to play guard. So I honestly think that they're gonna have a downtick this year, largely with the Diego Pavia. Jared Curtis, I think, is going to be a really good quarterback down the road, but it is so tough to start as a freshman in the SEC. I think they filled holes as well as they could. But it is still Vanderbilt, and I think Clark Lee is a great coach, but the Pavia effect definitely helped them the last couple of years. What do you think, Kevin?
Yeah, I think definitely Pop play is going to and the relationship with the tight end and that whole piece. So I do think they'll take a step back. Now that being said, they've got really good coaches. Clark Lee's a good coach. Their offensive line coach does a great job. So I think they will still be a solid team. I'll be honest. I think the way that they coach them up and they have brought in talent with the portal, I think the drop off might be less than we think. Now, again, they were 10-2 regular season team this year, but I think they can be competitive enough to still be in that 8-4, maybe 7-5 range. And I'm really curious to see how Jared Curtis plays, because the one thing with Pavia, he did a great job of getting first downs, and I think you can replicate that in the next quarterback. They didn't count on him to throw the ball all over the field. Again, I give Pavia all the credit in the world. He was a great leader, did a lot of great things. But I think if they continue to run that offense, which they do, all their coaches are back, I think they can replicate a lot of those same things by just having better players than they've had previously. If you look at their historical piece, so I like what Vanderbilt's done. I think they'll still be competitive in today's landscape.
Yeah, I was going to come back to Curtis. Obviously still in the number one quarterback in the country from Georgia, as he was a Kirby Smart commit. That was an incredible coup by Vanderbilt and their staff there. And early reports on the kid is he's the real deal. He's already on campus. He practiced with him during their bowl workouts and stuff. And like I said, all reports were that he's special. So. It's going to depend on his offensive line and his running backs. How are they going to be able to protect him? They're going to be able to give him the time and free him up to do what he does best, and that's throw the football. We'll see how it goes, but he, like I said, you can't get better than getting the number one ranked quarterback, high school quarterback in the country. So hats off to Lee and his staff for pulling that one off. What team we going to next, buddy?
Yeah, we're going to jump into the Mississippi State Bulldogs here, coming off a 5-8 season where they got into a bowl game there due to some opt-outs. So one thing that I really like from a coaching perspective with them is they brought Zach Arnett back, who was a really good DC under Mike Leach, and then assumed the head coaching position for a season. I think he is a really good defensive coordinator. So I'll start with defense first. They return a lot back on the defensive line and edge position. They did lose Kedrick Bingley Jones to the transfer portal to Alabama, but they brought in a few guys. Jason Jenkins from Florida State had a couple sacks at edge, and then Dalen Evans from Texas A&M was a guy who never fully got going at A&M, but I think has a bright future. So they did a good job filling the holes there. Their linebacker room, they basically return everybody. Nick Mitchell, Zachary Tillman, and Brandon Jennings are all guys I think are going to have good seasons next year. And then they did add in Gav Holman, a transfer from Florida State, and then a couple guys from high school. And then defensive back, they lost Mitchell to Ole Miss, who was kind of a little bit more of a role player. And then they lost Javen Williams as well to BYU. But they brought in Quentin Taylor from Iowa State, Kendall Dolby from Oklahoma, and Jordan Gilbert from LSU. So I think they're going to be fine on the defensive side in comparison to where they were last year. I don't see any big names that just really strike out or strike me as, all conference players, but they should be able to develop and be better than they were last year. And then over on the offensive side, I like their quarterback room more this year. Kamario Taylor should be their starter going into the season. Luke Kromenhoek transferred to USF. And then they added AJ Swan, who I think is going to be a quality depth piece. And then Jaden Rashada, who, was a really highly rated recruit coming out of high school, has kind of bounced around from Georgia and Sacramento State and a few other places. Running back room, I mean, they return about 1,400 rushing yards between Bluff Bothwell and Devon Booth. So I think they're good there. And then the wide receiver position, they did a pretty good job as well. Anthony Evans will be back, who, had 821 yards. And then they added Marquise Johnson from Missouri, who I think is a really good add for them. He was, top 3 receiver at Mizzou last year, roughly 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. So another quality piece for them to add to the wide receiver room. Offensive line, they lost Javen James, their left tackle, to Alabama, but they added 8 guys in the to their offensive line room from the portal. A couple guys from Florida State, Mario Nash, a tackle, Brandon Snee from UAB, Miles McVay from UNC. And I think their best young pickup out of the portal was Tyler Miller from LSU. I think that kid's got a lot of potential. So overall, I'm pleased with how they did in the portal. Coming off a 5-8 season, I'm not gonna predict them to win, 8 or 9 games or anything, but I think they've put together a roster now where they can get to true bowl eligibility this year. 6-6. So yeah, any thoughts, Sweets?
Yeah, they picked up quite a few guys, and they also got LSU lineman DJ Chester as well. I think it was a good move to bring Arnett back. He is a solid DC. He just, some guys are coordinators, some guys are position coaches, and some guys are head coaches. I think the guy knows a lot of football, and I think that might have been their biggest pickup of the offseason is getting somebody in there who knows the lay of the land and can turn that around quickly. As far as what they had outgoing, they didn't lose a ton of production, so it's not going to hurt them too badly. And as you had said, they picked up Cherokee, Canton, Georgia's AJ Swan, who was on maybe his 5th college team now. Let's see, Vanderbilt, LSU, App State 4th, and then Mississippi State. So hopefully he will step in and perform if needed. They also picked up another Georgia quarterback product, MJ Morris, out of Pace Academy, who's bounced around. He was at NC State for a minute. I think most recently he was at one of the Florida schools, or perhaps it was Coastal Carolina. I think it was Coastal Carolina, but so he's been around, and they're moving and shaking there. Kev?
I like what Mississippi State's done. I think they've been very efficient in how they've spent money. I do like Tyler Miller a lot. He's one that I was hoping LSU could hold on to. So I think that's a good addition for them. And I like their quarterback that they got that was a freshman this year. I think he was a very good player, and I think he shows a lot of promise in that offense. Like the receiver room, I think the losses on the offensive line concern me a little bit. That being said, Levy's a good offensive coach, and I'm sure he has a plan there for that aspect of it. I like bringing Arnett back. I think he was a very good defensive coach with Leach. So I think that was a very wise move. So, look, they were about, I think, 5-7 this year. So they were just, right at really close to that 500 mark. And so I see them with what they've brought in, taking that next step, going 7-5. And if you catch a break, maybe maybe popping 8-4 next year. So I like what Mississippi State's doing.
Nice. So let's
I think they'll improve. I'm not as high as 8-4, but I don't know their schedule either.
No, I-
And that has a lot to do with it in the SEC. Sometimes you can luck out and get a weaker draw, and you a very, very average team could be 8-4 or 9-3 if they got the luck of the schedule gods helping them out.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on them going 8-4. Like I said, mostly 7-5. But if you get a fortunate win, you never know.
Where are we going next?
Yeah, we can either roll into Texas or Texas A&M. I'll let you guys choose.
I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kev. Sorry.
All right, so let's go to A&M and let's knock them off here. So look, really good team this past year, 11-1. Only lost regular season was to Texas. Really performed well. So if I just go room by room, quarterback room, Marcel Reed will be back, and he was absolutely a very good player, and I think he will continue to grow. He struggled down the stretch a little bit. I wouldn't say struggle; he just didn't play as well. Maybe is the right word. His backup will be Brady Hart, who's a freshman, so a little bit concern there for depth. Running back. Reuben Owens and Jamarian Morrow will be the running back. So a little depth there, losing Moss to graduation. But the biggest part of their team that changes is their offensive line. They're replacing pretty much from left tackle to right tackle. And they were very active in the portal to try to get that done. Colin Eccles, Tyree Adams, Traven Ball, Jamarian Morrow were all guys with SEC experience. Wilkin Formby were all guys. Mario was a running back. I'm sorry. Traven Ball, Tyree Adams, Colin Eccles, Wilkin Formby, all came from different SEC schools. Eccles, Adams from LSU, Formby from Alabama, Traven Ball was from South Carolina. So that is, how quickly can they get that to perform next year? Because they had the best offensive line in the SEC this year. And so that's going to be a big challenge for them to take those guys. And I say that to say, look, they are all talented, but none of those guys are just standouts. Adams was solid in pass protection, but wasn't really good in run blocking. Eccles was a better run blocker than a pass blocker. For me, it just depends on where you play him. He was good at guard. He wants to play right tackle, and I think that's their plans. But he is not good in pass protection. And then Traven Ball, South Carolina might have had the worst offensive line in the SEC last year. So I think that's going to be a big challenge for them to take this group of offensive linemen and get them to play at their level last year. Wide receiver, Concepcion's going to the NFL, great player. They did pick up Isaiah Horton from Alabama, and they bring him back with Mario Craver and Terry Bussey. So still a good wide receiver room. Maybe not the elite guy like Concepcion was, but Craver's really good and athletic. And Bussey, you expect him at some point to develop into more of a wide receiver, not just an athlete. And then that. So on the defensive side, again, let me start in the secondary because I think that's going to be their strength. And they bring a lot of guys back there. Desrick at cornerback, Julio Humphrey at cornerback, Tavik Bird is transferring from Colorado, Ricky Gibson, Dalton Brooks at safety. I think that's their best part of their defense. Where they're going to be really challenged on defense is defensive end. Losing Cassius Howell again, who might have been the best pass rusher in the SEC. They have TJ Searcy and Sam Mbumba. And they also lost Solomon Williams, who was a spot pass rusher. He entered the portal and transferred. So I think that defensive end room will take a good hit there. Secondary solid. Defensive tackle, they have DJ Hicks. They did lose a young promising guy in Dalen Evans. So I think, again, solid at defensive tackle, but lost some depth. They can't really have injuries there. And then linebacker, I think, is another one they took a little hit at. They did bring back Damian Sanford, who's played a lot but not started. They got Ray Coney, a transfer from Tulsa. at linebacker also there. So I think, defensively, they're going to take within what they lose in the front, the defensive end position and linebacker. I expect their defense to drop from, a solid AB plus type defense to, probably a B minus type defense. The secondary is going to help them. If they stay injury free, now look, if they have some injuries at defensive tackle, they could get really soft up the middle and that defense could fall to a C. And then with what they lost on that offensive line, I think that's going to affect their offense and Reed and his ability to be as dynamic as he was. So I look at A&M as still a good team, competitive team. I don't think they're the same talent across the board. They really didn't have any weak positions last year. If you really looked at their team, they were solid across the board. But I think this year, overall team roster, more of an 8-4 traditional type Aggie team. Still has some talented players, but again, big hole in that offensive line, big hole at defensive end and linebacker. You guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how sophomore transfer Tyree Adams does with a change of scenery. He was highly thought of and did an okay job for LSU. I personally didn't think he played as well as I'd hoped or as we'd hoped. But I think he's somebody with some ability that he could go there and he could step in immediately, and maybe a change of scenery will do him good. Elko's a solid coach, and he's going to coach the kids up. At the end of the day, Aggie going to Aggie. It doesn't matter. Like I said, 11-0, 12-0, whatever. We all know how it ends. I ain't got much to say about him. D-Mac.
Yeah, I love the addition of Isaiah Horton. You're not going to replace Casey Concepcion, immediately, but between he, Craver, and Bethel Roman and Terry Bussey, that's a good top 4 group for them. So I think, to me, that's their biggest addition, is at the wide receiver room, which I do love the Ricky Gibson add to at corner. Was a really talented player who battled some injury at Tennessee last year. But yeah, so want to move on to Texas now?
Yes, sir. Texas made a big splash in the portal. I'll talk about some of the guys that they lost first. They lost 4 starters, 3 on the offensive side of the ball, 1 on the defensive side of the ball. They lost starting slot receiver DeAndre Moore, who had 1 year of eligibility remaining. Running back Quintravion Wisner, who'd been at Texas for 3 years, and wide receiver Parker Livingstone, who's got 3 years of eligibility remaining as well. On defense, they lost linebacker, where to have him, Leona Lefau, who transferred out. They'll miss him, I think, but they did a heck of a job picking guys up in the portal. They got who the best receiver in the portal with a bullet, I think, in Coleman from Auburn. That was a great pickup, and they paid through the nose for him. Picked up a few guys on the defensive side. Defensive tackle Zion Williams from LSU didn't get a lot of time at LSU last year, but he's a kid that does have some ability and can do well for him. And they did a hell of a job in the running back room, picking up Hollywood Smothers. You spoke about him last night, I believe, D-Mac, a kid from North Carolina State who rushed for just under 1,000 yards in 2025, and had a couple hundred yards receiving as well. So I look for Texas to be a highly rated team this year. I think that Arch Manning is going to come into his own this year. I don't know that he's going to win the Heisman. I don't have any crazy expectations because of his last name, but the kid's going to be a solid quarterback. Now, he's going to do well his senior season. I expect Texas to be a playoff team with the potential that they have, combined with their schedule. If Sark doesn't get him to a playoff this year, he's going to be in trouble. What are your thoughts on Texas, Kevin?
Excuse me. Loaded. I think they have the best roster in the SEC when you look at what they have on offense with Smothers at running back, Manning at quarterback, Coleman, Wingo at wide receiver, offensive line bringing back a lot of experience, got the offensive tackle from Wake Forest. And to me, no weaknesses at all on offense, and a lot of experience. And then on the defensive side, you got Colin Simmons, and experience pretty much across the board. On defense too. Even though they lose their middle linebacker, they still have Ty Anthony Smith, so to step in and fill that role. So if I had to just say who has the best roster in the SEC right now, it would be Texas with what they bring back, the experience and everything there. So, DMAC, your thoughts?
Yeah, I love their revamped running back room. They lost a couple guys there, brought in Hollywood Smothers and Raleek Brown from Arizona State. Those two guys combined for 2,000 yards and 10 touchdowns last year at their respective schools, and also add almost 500 yards in the passing game, too. Which, in my opinion, is something the running backs at Texas kind of fell short of last year, was not being a great outlet for Arch to go to. Cam Coleman, probably, the best player, one of the top two out of the portal. I really also like the Melvin Siani addition from Wake Forest at tackle. And then I like Ian Gefford from Arkansas. He had 18 tackles, solo tackles last year, and 8 quarterback hurries. So that just adds even more depth to the defensive tackle room for them. So yeah, I'm with you guys. This probably is the most complete roster in the SEC for sure. So that will take us to, let me see. I will take
Covering
us
South
to,
Carolina.
yeah, I'm going to go Kentucky first here.
Let's do it.
Kentucky's a
Let's do
team
it.
that I like. They have a new head coach in Will Stein. They lost 23 guys to the portal and added 30. Their quarterback room is completely revamped. Cutter Bowley's gone, transferred to Arizona State, and then you had Zach Calzada. He's graduated. So is Bo Allen. They brought in Kenny Minchie, who was the backup at Notre Dame, who I think is going to be a really good guy for them over the next couple years. Played behind CJ Carr last year, he was a phenomenal quarterback at Notre Dame. Their running back room takes a major hit though, with Seth McGowan and Dante Dowdell hitting the portal and graduating. They brought in CJ Baxter from Texas, who was a 5-star coming out of high school. He'll have a couple years of eligibility left. And then they added Javante Barnes, too, from Oklahoma, who didn't play a ton. So their running back room, I get a little bit of a question there. But Jason Patterson, who was their third string guy, returns. And then their wide receiver room, between graduations and transfers, got gutted pretty hard. Kendrick Law graduates. Hardly Gilmore transferred to Baylor. Jamori Macklin graduated. Cameron Miller transferred to Ole Miss. The only guy they return with over 10 receptions is DJ Miller, who was a true freshman. And then they lost, 4 or 5 other guys to graduation in the transfer portal. They did bring in Nick Anderson from LSU, who battled some injuries at Oklahoma and LSU. They added Shane Carr, who is from a Midwestern school, had almost 800 yards last year receiving. And then they added Xavier Daisy, who had 18 catches from UAB. So really a revamped running back room that I don't think exactly hits the mark on talent that they had previously. Their O line is going to be completely revamped too, with I think 4 guys graduating, one going to the NFL draft. So they added a bunch of transfers. Um, Lance Hurd at left tackle from Tennessee, Turga Toshoba from Ohio State, um, Olas Alinen from Alabama, and Max Anderson from Tennessee, Colton Price at center from Baylor. So a really revamped offensive line room. But Will Stein's an offensive minded coach, so while they are replacing a lot of production there, they fill some holes pretty well. On the defensive side, they lose Jared Smith to the transfer portal to Louisville, but they return a really good defensive end group in Khalil Saunders, Marquise Humphrey Grace, Tavion Gatson. And then at defensive tackle, David Gusta and Josiah Hayes are back. They did add Dominic Wiseman from South Florida there, Ahmad Bro from LSU for the defensive tackle room. And then, they added a couple edges from smaller schools like Antonio O'Berry and Tyler Thomas, who combined for 8 sacks at their last stops. Linebacker room as well is in a pretty good place. They've got Grant Godfrey coming back. They added Elijah Barnes from Texas, who was a true freshman last year, and Tavion Wallace from Arkansas. I think they took quite a hit in the defensive back room. JQ Hardaway graduates at corner. Cam Dooley and Quashade Scott hit the portal, going to Florida and Carolina, respectively. Nasir Addison is in the portal. They do add Aaron Gates and Jordan Castell from Florida. So they made a few moves. I think overall, though, this is a Kentucky team that's coming off a 5-7 season. I think with a new coaching staff, filling a couple holes, they're going to be a much improved team. I think they're more of a 7-5 team this next season than 5-7, even with a completely revamped coaching staff. So, Jay Bateman is their new defensive coordinator. So really like the additions that they made to their staff and to their team. What are your thoughts, Kevin?
I really like what Kentucky did. If you just to me look at and say, okay, what team improved their roster the most this year, I would say I would go with Kentucky. When you look at their team last year, they really had no game breakers on offense at all. Um, they improved their running back room a lot, and I think they improved their wide receiver room a lot. I really like what they've done to their team. Again, I think they can be a solid 7-5, and they to I think they really overachieved to get to 5-7 last year. If you want my opinion, they might have had the worst roster in the SEC last year. I would put, even though the wins didn't show this, I would have put Arkansas's roster over Kentucky's last year. I just think Kentucky was a better coach team. They were good fundamentally. So I really like what they've done. Sweets, what's your thoughts?
I'm with you. They did great work in the portal. Bringing Stein in, I think was a great move. Kentucky wanted to get away from being, Stoops is known as a defensive guy, and Kentucky had some pretty solid defenses in his time there, but they didn't have a lot of offensive output. That it was very sporadic in Stoops' time there. So going out and getting Kenny Minchie from Notre Dame, I think he will probably be expected to come in and start. Highly thought of coming out of high school, but he got beat out by CJ Carr last year. So That no shame in that. Carr's a hell of a quarterback, but there's only one quarterback can play at a time. So I think that Minchie's going to come in and do a good job for Kentucky. I'm really interested to see how offensive coordinator Joe Sloan and Stein mesh with each other. If Stein is going to have a huge hand in the play calling and whatnot, or if he's going to let Sloan do his thing. Us three having some Sloan experience, I don't think any of us are overly impressed with his ability to call plays, or do anything that we all don't know what's coming. But part of that is growth too. He's only called plays for a few years, and perhaps he'll grow into being a better OC with having another strong offensive minded guy like Stein with him. So we'll be interested to see how that turns out for him.
Don't you think Stein's going to be the play caller though? I think Sloan will just be coaching execution.
I'm curious to see. I haven't studied up enough to know one way or another. I mean, he did a great job. Stein did a great job as an OC, but I think Stein's a better play caller than Sloan. But well, that's what I said. That's why I said I'm curious to see how they mesh and how that works itself out. A lot of egos in that room, and sometimes when egos get rubbed the wrong way, things get ugly quickly. So we'll see how that works out for him.
Yeah, so we'll roll on.
Go next,
let's roll into South Carolina. I want to get them knocked out here quickly. They added 25 guys from the portal, lost 20. I'm gonna speed through them a little bit. So at quarterback, they still have Lenore Sellers and brought in Landon Duckworth out of the high school ranks as a backup. Running back room, they lost Faison to graduation, and they brought in Christian Clark from Texas, along with Jabri Coleman, who redshirted at Penn State last year. Their wide receiver room, they lost Jacobs to the transfer portal to Miami, lost Brian Rowe Jr., true freshman that they thought a lot of, to UCLA. And they brought in Nitro Tuggle, who was at Purdue most recently, started out his career at Georgia, added Jaden Gibson from Oklahoma, who didn't play last year. Then they added a couple other, lower end transfers and a few guys from the high school ranks. Their offensive line is, they lose left guard, center, and right guard. But they added Jacarius Peak out of the transfer portal from NC State, who I think is a really good addition. He would be my highlight of their class from the transfer portal. Over on defense, they were able to retain Dylan Stewart, but at the edge position, they do lose Brian Thomas Jr. and Desmond Imazola. Defensive line, they lose Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwin. They brought in Kelby Collins from Alabama and Tamawa. I'm not even going to try his last name, from Illinois. Linebacker room, I think, is probably going to be the strength of what they're returning, aside from Dylan Stewart. J.R. Johnson is back. Justin Okoronkwo is back. I know I butchered his name. Sean Murphy's back. Their defensive back room, they did lose DQ Smith and Jalen Kilgore to graduation and draft. Brandon Cease is heading off to the draft as well. They did add Quashid Scott from Kentucky at nickelback, who I think is going to be a good addition. Between the two guys who I think were a key for them to retain, or three guys, were Sellers, Harbor, and then Stewart on defense. I don't think this team really got better than they were last year when they went 4-8. They might be able to win another game. They lost a couple close ones. To Texas A&M, to Missouri, to LSU, and to Alabama. And to Clemson. That was a relatively close game. I've got them in like that 4-8 to like 6-6 ranking again, even with a quarterback who has all the potential that Lenore Sellers has. I just don't think there's enough weapons on that team. What do you think, Sweets?
One of my favorite pickups for them was edge player Caleb Herring out of Kevin's hometown in Newnan, Georgia, but he played at Tennessee. He had 14 tackles on the year, but he had 4 sacks and a handful of pressures and stuff. And I think that a change of scenery and getting in a situation where he's going to get more consistent playing time is going to be big for him. And I think he's going to be one of their best defensive players this year. So Caleb Herring is my Gamecock of the week for the portal. Kev?
Yeah, I think he got a lot of pressures at Tennessee, and so again, Tennessee rotated a lot of their defensive linemen and stuff. But I think Herring will be a standout there, especially opposite what they have on their defensive line. I think the biggest thing for South Carolina was the fact that Clayton White, who was rumored at one point in time that he was going to leave and go take another DC position somewhere, they were able to hold on to him. I think Clayton White's one of the best defensive coordinators in college football. And with what they bring back and the additions they made on defense, they're going to be really good on defense again. They've been solid, pretty much since he's been there. So I think that they will be good there. And then let me also say this: I really like the addition of Kendall Briles on the offensive side and what he can bring to Sellers. When you look at a coordinator that matches what a quarterback's talent is, I really like what they can do there with Sellers. I think Briles will spread the field. Bring the running game, a lot of RPO stuff that Sellers can execute. So I think they'll be an improved team. Again, I don't think they're going to win 9, but I think they can get back to 7 wins, and again with a break in the right schedule, maybe 8. Solid team. So I that's where I would put them. But I like what South Carolina's done more with a coaching staff than what they did in the portal. That's where I would think their biggest moves will be, is they will be a better coach team on the offense. And I do like their moves on the offensive line. That offensive line was bad last year. So that's where I stand.
Does 7 wins keep Beamer employed?
I think 7 does, but I could be wrong.
DMAC?
Those South Carolina football fans are so weird. I think bowl eligibility is a good place for them to be. I think they've got to have more realistic expectations. Like, I know going into last year, there was so much talk, or the last couple years with Beamer, Beamer ball's going to get us to the playoff. There's just some teams that aren't destined for college football playoffs, and South Carolina football is one of those teams, in my opinion.
I would agree.
Can't disagree with that.
So that brings us to the Arkansas Razorbacks. What do you have on them, Kevin?
Man, so a team that took 40 players in the portal. But when you really look at what they took, it was a lot of guys that could be depth pieces for other teams that are going to have to play for them. Again, I'll just go position by position again with what they've got. KJ Jackson will be the quarterback. They lose Taylon Green. And, as much as Green did for them with a lot of dynamic plays, he had a lot of turnovers and a lot of mistakes. I really think KJ Jackson with Silverfield might be a better quarterback long-term for them. Running back room, they lose, Mike Washington graduated, Rodney Hill transferred. Braylon Russell is going to have to step up. They did get Jasper Parker in the portal. They also lost AJ Green, so they lost a lot in that running back room. Um, Offensive line, they bring a lot of guys back. Carmona, Terrence Roderick. They lose Amarian Harris, and I think that's a good loss for them. So I think their offensive line is a solid B type, with what they have and what they had last year. They also bring Rohan Jones back at tight end, and I thought he was one of the better tight ends in the SEC. And so I think they'll need his production again. And again, they were really good on offense. So bringing him back is a big part of that. They lose Omega Blake. They lose Sharp to graduation, and they lost Andy Jean to the transfer portal. So receiver, they'll have to have some guys that to kind of develop and grow up. Jalen Brown, who was a transfer they had this year, was playing really well till he broke his leg. So they need him to come back and be their solid number one to take Blake's place. And then they need Courtney Crutchfield to take a step forward. Monty Harrison, they need him to, he was hurt this year, but he's an older guy, played professional baseball and came back to football. So they need some of those guys to step up. But overall, if Jackson can play without the turnovers, he's also a very dynamic athlete too. And he played very well against Texas. He scored 21 points against Texas in the second half in that game. So I think if Jackson can play well offensively, they can maintain a lot of the production they had. Then you get over on the defensive side of the ball, and this is where, to me, it's just like, it's hard for me to tell what they got. They picked up Trajan Odom from Ohio State. They picked up Hunter Osborne. They picked up, LaMarcus Hicks, Jaheim Johnson. They got Miguel Milton back out of the portal. But then they also lost Tavion Wallace, Kevin Otis, Danny Soley. They lost Ian Gafford to Texas. And they weren't a very good defense last year. So I just don't know if they improve their talent and enough of that on defense. I think Arkansas is going to continue to struggle. Just my opinion. They have not. I mean, they brought in 40 players, but when you look at what they spend in the portal, it is not the same amount of money that the other teams in the SEC does. And I just don't know if they're going to have the top end talent on the defensive side to improve that defense. And look, offense was not their problem last year. It was stopping people from scoring and playing mistake free. I think they can be better coached, and I think better coached might get them 4 or 5 wins. I just think this is going to take a little deeper rebuild than a 1 year and a 1 year portal deal. That's my thoughts. What's you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with you. Listen, I was counting their ports. It took a while because there were like 75 between incoming and outgoing. They lost 7 DBs and brought 10 in, which is I mean, you talk about revamping a room. You bring 10 guys into a DB room. That's a whole new 2 deep. With 2 corners, 2 safeties, and a nickel. That there you go. It's so that's pretty wild. They can't be worse than they were defensive last year. Can they? I mean, I don't know if these kids that they brought in are any better, but performance-wise, obviously they got a new staff, and hopefully they can coach these kids up and scheme a little better. As last year's staff just didn't do it for them. DMAC?
Yeah, this is probably as much needed of a rebuild as anybody in the SEC, just to get to bowl eligibility, which I don't think they get to next year. But I love Steven Souls, the addition at defensive end from Kentucky. He had 6 sacks last year. I think he could be, their biggest portal addition on the defensive side of the ball. I do take a lot of their losses with a grain of salt, especially on defense. If you lose 15, 20 guys from a bad defense, are they really that much of a loss? From a funding standpoint, we'll talk about another team that added around 40 guys here in a second. And if you look at the pay versus Arkansas to LSU, it's not even close to the level of talent that was brought in. So, yeah, that's going to be something interesting to see is how well can Silverfield and the staff at Arkansas develop that talent moving forward. So we could.
One more mention on that piece, and the talent and the money. They lost a freshman kicker that was a freshman All-American in Scott Sarzik and took a kicker that was a backup at Tennessee in the portal. Again, that just shows me where they're kind of at. I mean, and again, losing to Marion Harris, a potential starter at right tackle. I think they'll be better. I just think they got a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree. So that brings us to LSU. Sweets, I know you've got a run in a few minutes, so we'll let you lead
Oh,
things
you're
off
fine.
with LSU.
You're fine. First of all, let me say that the Portal King lived up to his name with the additions and the star power in the additions. Two of the top quarterbacks in Levitt and Longstreet, and the third quarterback in Clark, who may end up being as good or better than both of them in the long run. Getting Seaton at tackle. It was just an insane past week for LSU in the portal. It started off a little slow. We signed about it seemed about 20 receivers before we signed a quarterback. But once we opened up the quarterback room, it filled up quickly and with a lot of talent. I I think LSU probably had the best incoming class by far. We did lose a little talent on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively, but I do think that it will be replaced and, more importantly, coached up, which was a big issue with LSU the past few seasons with evaluations and development. So hopefully, what we're going to see is better evaluations, better development, and if this portal class is any indication. The evals are strong because the kids that they got are proven college players who's got skins on the wall. So, what are your thoughts, Kev?
I really love what LSU did in the portal. I mean, golly, they took a weak offensive line and now they have depth. I love Ball from Maryland. We talk about Seaton, but Ball's a guy that's played a lot of college football and only given up one sack. And he's played right guard, left guard, played a little bit of tackle. I think it'll be interesting to see where they put him. And then you have Devin Harper. You took Satterwhite from Tennessee. Um, you took Stray from Kentucky. Where I'm going with this, you went from a very suspect offensive line, and of course Seaton played a big part of this. Now you are too deep across, so now you have competition. And I know they want Weston Davis to lose a little bit of weight to be a little bit more athletic at the right tackle spot. He's certainly got athletic ability, so I love what they've done there. Wide receiver room, they took 9, a lot of good players. You got Wilson, you got who I think will be really good. You got the kid from Kansas State who I really like in the slot. And then you have Barry, Durham, Jones at running back. Those are 3 going to be really good ones. I love the quarterback room. You didn't just go get a starter. You got 3 quarterbacks that can all play, at this level. So I love what they've done there. And then that didn't even talk about the defense. The defense literally will be one of the best defenses in college football next year. You already had a strong secondary, and you added Delane, and you added the safety from Boise State. And then you added Daughtery to a strong linebacker, solid linebacker room with Keys and Weeks. But then a lot of those young guys, Ross can play, Breaker, I think he will play next year. So you got a lot of talent there. And then you added Blockton and Green at defensive tackle to go with Anderson, McKinley. I think Brown will play some strong side defensive end. But, there'll be times, that he could slide inside to rush from tackle. There's just no weaknesses on the team. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how they use the star position. I'm not going to be surprised at all. I know they want to use Spears kind of in that role. but I'm not going to be surprised at all if he were to play free safety and you see someone like Delane, who's 210, slide down to that star position. And I think they may even play people, um, kind of based on the need too, as far as is it coverage down or is it a passing down? They have a lot of intangibles on defense. And then when they added Prince Emelion, to that defensive end room with 9.5 sacks, uh, you know, you just they have Ross there, um, so three guys that can start at defensive end, and then like I say with that secondary, I think you're looking at a top 10 defense, and you combine that with what they added on the offensive line, the quarterback room, the receivers. I think they're going to have a top 10 offense too. They have a great schedule. It's going to be a lot of fun to watch. You get into October, November, you're going to have Alabama, Tennessee, Texas on the schedule in that time frame. Early key games. I'm not even going to throw Clemson. I think that you got to win that game, and you will. But the early games in September that are important to me are Ole Miss and A&M, and then you get into that November run where you got Alabama, Tennessee, Texas. It's going to be a lot of fun games to watch. You got Auburn at the end of October. I think the roster will be able to step up to that. I know I'm rattling a lot here, but I just think there's so much been done to this team. I think Texas has the best roster because of what the most experience and they play together. I think Georgia has a really, really good roster, but give this team some experience, and I think LSU's roster is absolutely every bit as good as anybody's. I think defensively they will. I will say this: I think LSU will have the best defensive roster in the SEC next year. DMAC, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we added 40 guys in the portal this year. Every position on LSU's team got better. Quarterback, you've got three really good pieces in Levitt, Longstreet, and Clark. Running back, you were able to retain your top two guys. I think Dylan Jones from Wisconsin is a guy who's going to be able to provide some value too. Running or the wide receiver room. I really like Jackson Harris too from Hawaii. He's a bigger guy. I also think, Jabari Mack and Corey Barber as freshmen are going to be able to come in and compete. The offensive line is definitely a huge, huge step up. You keep Braylon Moore, who should be fully healthy too at the center position. Jordan Seaton, Devin Harper, Ball, and Weston Davis are all going to be key pieces. Solomon Thomas, Satterwhite, Stray, Tompkins, Jones are all going to be really good pieces too. You've got Malik Blockton coming in, who I think from a transfer portal standpoint is better than anything that we lost in the defensive tackle room. And you've got Richard Anderson, Deuce Geralds, and Lamar Brown all between D line and edge. Prince Well and Jordan Ross are really good additions. Prince Well has a ton of production in the SEC already after coming off a 9-sack season. With Whit Weeks hopefully being healthy all next season, and TJ Daugherty, who, had over 90 tackles last year at Ole Miss. That's a huge piece. And then I love the addition of Scott Starzik at kicker. You mentioned it when we were talking about Arkansas, freshman All-American kicker. Damian Ramos was almost automatic inside about 45 yards. I think Scott adds something even more to that kicking room. And then I love adding a little competition in the punter room too with Hayden Craig. Chadwick was really good last year, but I love having someone else there. If there's injuries or, a setback in performance this year. So, Yeah, I think LSU really dominated in the portal. They're number one recruiting class, uh, portal class by quite a few people. Number one overall as well between portal and high school. So they did a really good job with the additions this year, and now we've just got to see how it all blends together with a new offensive coaching staff and new head coach in Baton Rouge. I do like that there's a lot of you know commonality on the defense from guys last year. I think Chris Kiffin's going to be an addition, taking over linebackers as well. And then the coach from South Carolina who came over for defensive line. I'm definitely going to miss Kyle Williams, but he was ready to step away from football for a while. So love getting another good addition there. So I think LSU upgraded in every position, and every coaching change that was made is, at least if not a huge step up, a very comparable transfer. The defensive line coach being the closest comparison, but huge upgrades across the offense from a coaching standpoint too.
Huge on the offensive side. Charlie Weiss, Cox at tight end, the offensive line, Wolford there, and then that goes without saying about what Lane does. We will, again, when you take Weiss and Lane, and again, Kevin Smith's a really good running backs coach. You're not going to get out. There's not a better offensive staff in the country. So you almost swing from one of the worst offensive staffs in the SEC to one of the best offensive staffs in the country. And I don't think that that's an exaggeration on either side. That offensive staff last year, you look across the board, was not coached well at the offensive line. Even though Frank Wilson's done a lot for LSU over the years, the running back room was not coached well. Offensive coordinator Sloan was not very good at all. And then I don't know how he always levels up with jobs, but when you look at, we had to rebuild the wide receiver room with 9 guys. Hankton did not do a very good job at all in the wide receiver room. All the drops we had, Barian Brown was one of the leaders in the league in drops. Huge upgrade. You mentioned it. Huge upgrade, just staff wise.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned Cortez Hankton going to Ohio State. Ohio State did not do a good job replacing Brian Hartline with Arthur Smith and Hankton. I would say maybe the only positive is Kyle Parker going there. He's probably, from a talent standpoint, their 4th or 5th best receiver on that Ohio State roster next year. But he's a guy who I trust on third downs. He was a huge go-to for LSU. I was talking to a big Ohio State fan, and I was like, man, you guys are going to really like Kyle Parker there. He's not going to have a bunch of 150-yard games, but he's going to have 25 to 30 really meaningful receptions this year on, a 3rd and 5, a 3rd and 6 that move the chains for you guys. They've got, tons of talent over there at Ohio State, but I think Parker is a guy who fits a role that they don't have somebody in right now.
I agree with you. I like Kyle Parker a lot. When when Anderson went out, he kind of stepped up into that role. Him and Thomas kind of split that role. He was the one wide receiver that I was hoping LSU could hang on to. So I think Parker will be good for them. Totally agree with you, though. They did not replace Hartline in no way, shape, or form. Hartline is one of the best recruiters in college football at the wide receiver position. And you look at what Hankton did, not just at LSU, at Georgia. He's not recruited deep wide receiver rooms at either place. So, he tends to be able to use his resume to level up. But he is certainly now going to have exposure if he cannot keep what the tradition is at Ohio State in that wide receiver room.
Yeah, I think, especially at Georgia, you had Kirby's a great recruiter all over the board, but I think Todd Monken from an OC perspective was able to, get more out of guys who weren't necessarily elite talents. And, I think that boded well for Cortez's career. And I think there's a chance that the talent at Ohio State overshadows that a little bit too, because there's just so much talent there now that it automatically makes that coach look better as well.
Well, he could certainly play Smith, and he happened to be there when Malik and BTJ were there. He didn't coach them their first year or so there, but you're right. He could certainly take next year and maybe he better that his agent better be trying to parlay that into an OC job somewhere.
Yeah.
Because if he's there for 3 years, that room's I would bet money that room will go down. It will become from an A+ room to B at best.
And who knows if there is, a huge downgrade in production from Ohio State for a couple of years. They may be looking for a new head coach in 3 years if their standard isn't met. And, an early name that I'm going to circle is going to be Brian Hartline. If he's got success at South Florida, I could see him making the jump from there back to Ohio State, because he's credited with a lot of the success that they've had.
Certainly could be interesting. Don't count out Freeman from Notre Dame, though. He's an Ohio State grad, and really well liked, very well spoken, really good coach. It's proven that he can run an organization, recruit, and do it all. And it's Ryan Day is an interesting figure. Losing to Michigan 4 years in a row certainly didn't help him. Of course, he did get that win this year. But yeah, if they were to slide, lose to Michigan again next year, they could get himself in trouble in the 2 years. He could. So it could be that's one of the best jobs in college football. That, Texas, LSU, USC, Georgia, those are your best jobs. I guess Oregon, you could throw them in there too.
Yeah. Well, any last minute thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think the next thing maybe we talk about, preseason top 10. I think we've got enough portal information about teams, and I think we could go preseason top 10 next. Tuesday, I think we want to get into some college basketball finally. We are getting deep into the conference season, so it is time to get into some college basketball stuff. So look forward to doing that. Maybe, like I said, a preseason top 10 in football, and then college baseball is right around the corner. So plenty of stuff to talk about sports-wise, as always.
Well, guys, thanks for listening to us tonight. We will see you on Tuesday. Remember to continue to like, follow, and subscribe, and we will talk.